right. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. Sorry for my earlier absence, but it couldn't be helped. However, I am back. I am back, and we're back in the world of Dune Adventures in the Imperium. We're finally into the core rules, which I think is fairly important. Let me move things over. No, let's do that. We've gone through a lot of the character generation stuff, the stuff that pertains to building out your player's stuff, your character itself, the house you might be a part of, or I guess the house that you are a part of, working towards, with, in the interests of. So now we finally get into kind of looking at some of the core mechanics, which, as someone who is, this is my first foray into 2D20. I'm very much interested in what these core mechanics are. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, this chapter introduces the core rules for playing. That's great. As the rest of the rules and the other chapters build on the mechanics found here, it's valuable to have a decent understanding of how all this works. All right, that's great. Moving on. All right, so dice. Let's see. We're using a single type of dice to resolve the actions of a character may attempt and the situations they may face, and they're using 20-sided dice, right? That makes sense. 2d20, 20-sided dice, often referred to as d20. Most of the time, more than one die is rolled at once. These dice are collectively referred to as a dice pool. The number of dice being rolled are noted as xd20, where x is the number of dice being rolled. So 2d20 means 2 20-sided dice are rolled. Okay, so it's something I didn't know, but I guess it's possible, maybe even probable, that we'll roll more than 2 d20. And so the one thing I'm going to be utterly incapable of addressing is how much of this is specific to Dune and how much of this is generic 2d20. If someone arrives on the scene who is able to provide that detail, let me know later on. That'd be great. So I'm just going to take the system as is. Unfortunately, I won't be able to compare and contrast this with other 2d20 properties because, like I said, or games, I should say, because this is my first. Rerolls. Some situations or abilities allow a character to reroll one or more dice. When rerolling dice, you choose the dice you wish to reroll. You then reroll those dice again, and the new results replace the old ones, even if the new result is worse. Some situations allow you to reroll a specific number of dice, while others allow an entire dice pool to be rerolled. You may always choose how many dice you wish to reroll up to the maximum listed. In essence, you can always choose not to reroll a die if you wish to keep that result. All right, so nothing can force you. If you rolled a bunch of dice and half of them are good and half of them are not so good, and something says, hey, you can re-roll your entire dice pool, sounds like you don't have to. You can always say, no, I just want to re-roll the failures. Once you've re-rolled a die, you may not re-roll it again. The second result stands, even if you have another ability that lets you re-roll. All right, that's interesting. So I guess you got to kind of keep track of the dice you're re-rolling in some fashion because you can't roll them more than once. So I'll keep a bunch of d20s with you. Oh, so characters. Okay, this chapter will refer to the abilities, which we already talked about before. So traits, skills, focuses, drive statements, talents, and assets. Hopefully, I'll remember all those. I don't want to. I'm trying to to keep up, not to keep up, to make sure I'm not spending time going over stuff I've already gone over. So I'm going to try to skip the things that we already have talked about. But since it's been a few days since I last looked at the book, apologies if in me trying to summarize what I'm skipping over, I goof something up. Scenes and traits. All adventures in Dune are broken down into scenes, which the game master is responsible for setting up. Once the game master has set up a scene, the players may take whatever actions they desire. Once there's nothing else they can or wish to do in that place, the scene ends. Scenes also include descriptors called traits, which point out anything important about the scene's time or place, or the characters or objects within it. All right, so we got a scene, a time, and a place. You're doing stuff. GM will set up the scene, play through the scene. Scene ends. There are aspects of the scene that are, I guess, descriptors, and they're called traits. Good and good. At the start of a scene, the game master will inform you where the character is, what's going on, and anything else useful or important you should know. So they're definitely going for more of a, I don't want to say narrative. Hey, Brian Smith. Cinematic, but you're definitely, it seems like they're setting up so as a GM, you're able to kind of do an in media res, however you want to, right? You're in the middle of doing this thing, and this thing happens. That's where we're gonna set the scene. So that's kind of part, I guess, of the GM, and it's true in most games. I think the more kind of sandboxy and sort of laissez-faire you are, the less you might do that. And I think sometimes, I know as a player, I found it a little bit frustrating when the GM would put me in a spot. And I'm like, I didn't want to be in that spot. You're in the middle of leaping across a chasm when the orcs attack. Whoa, 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 whoa! Like when did I want to leap across a chasm? But it's definitely a style thing. But the good thing about it is the they're setting it up, right? So ahead of time that in any particular moment, the GM is going to kind of set up the pieces, hopefully in accordance with what the players are doing or how they communicated what they're going to be doing next, and then set it off. During a scene, your decisions are important. The choices you make have an impact upon the world around your character, and you'll have to face the consequences of those choices. The game master can shape the events in the scene too by spending threat through the actions of non-player characters, but this is normally in response to your choices and those of your fellow players. So it seems like we're getting a little bit of a kind of powered by the apocalypse thing, in that the game master's a resource called threat. Beyond threat, they obviously have NPCs that they're able to, you as the game master are moving around and controlling, hopefully using them in the ways that they would most want to be used in the fiction. What would Fade Routha do here? Okay, I want to do that. But we're being told up front that you're usually supposed to respond, so that the player's supposed to take that first step and then you respond, which is kind of that powered by the apocalypse thing, as all the GM moves are basically responses to things the players do. So the players kind of set things in motion and do the action, and then the GM and the non-player characters tend to react. For the game master, part of setting up a new scene is describing the traits which apply to that scene. Traits describe the notable and interesting details. Okay, got that. I really want to get into the effects of traits. In practice, here we go. Traits have a simple impact on your character's actions. If a trait is relevant to an action being attempted, it makes the action possible or impossible, or it makes the action easier or harder. Multiple traits can be applied to a situation at once, whether canceling one another out or adding to one another. Some especially intense or potent traits may actually be multiple identical traits added together. A battlefield might be shrouded in smoke, or visibility might be reduced by thick smoke 2, the number indicating that it counts as 2 traits. All right, so there's some interesting stuff. So the traits, it seems like they're not just, a lot of times in games you see a trait and it's just kind of flat. Here they seem to be saying that you can have just a flat trait, which is just, hey, smoke, which would be a single trait. But that, since it can be doubled, I'm guessing that when you're rolling things or actions, or you're adjudicating actions with that interact with that trait, that number is going to be important in some way, or at least potentially important in some way. Okay, in practice, this is easy to apply. All right, well, we'll see about that rule book. Each trait can be placed into a simple statement, such as one of those below. And if the statement makes sense, then it applies. If it doesn't make sense, then it doesn't apply. Because I am, insert personal trait, this activity is ... Because of situation or location trait, this activity is ... Because I have, insert equipment trait, this activity is ... So in terms of the location traits, because the battlefield is shrouded in smoke, the activity, maybe it is looking for the enemy, is harder by a factor of 2 or whatnot. The end of each of those statements is either, okay, easier, harder, possible, or impossible. So we go back and say, okay, because of thick smoke 2, this activity is harder. Or you might say impossible for thick smoke 2, whatever it is. If the statement ends with easier, reduce the difficulty. If the statement ends with harder, increase the difficulty. If the statement ends with possible, then the activity can be attempted while the trait applies. While if it ends with impossible, then it can't be attempted while that trait applies. So the interesting thing, I guess, here is to keep in mind that you could try to get rid of the traits. It's not, they're not immutable. So which makes sense, right? We don't know what abilities you'll have to get rid of them. So for example, if you have, what was their example? The battlefield shrouded by thick smoke 2. Well, okay, that makes maybe some things harder, some things maybe impossible. But they're saying here, at least they're setting up for, hey, it's not that that's just the way it is and it can never be changed, but obviously the players or the NPCs, if the players have made it smoky for their reason, can try to, alleviate the situation. I guess if you have some kind of wind machine, or you can throw a bunch of water on it. I don't know, whatever it would be. You could try to, or get out the proper equipment to counteract that effect, right? Oh, it's smoky, so I can't do that. Oh, but can I switch to, I don't know. I don't even know. I was going to say infravision, but I don't know if that probably wouldn't work for everyone smoke. I'm not sure if there is a type of vision that would, as an infravision, night vision. I'm not sure if there's anything that would work better in smoke, but turn on the fog lights maybe on our ornithopters might be something that would work. It's also worth remembering. Oh, whoops! Somehow I got out of. How did I get out of full screen? There we go. Let's see. It is also worth remembering that if a trait makes an action impossible, that doesn't necessarily mean you can never attempt that action. Rather, it may mean that the action is impossible unless you change the situation to make it possible. Remember also that assets are also traits. If one can apply to a scene, it works just like any other trait. Having a knife makes combat easier than fighting unarmed. Having blackmail evidence makes an attempt to blackmail a target possible. For the most part, assets, especially in architect play, are what makes the test possible. All right, that's cool. So here we have an example. Cara Mollet, heir to her house, is trying to negotiate a new trade deal with a spice merchant at a local social gathering. As the merchant is known as a fair trader, Cara's player believes her honorable trait may apply. She tells the game master, excuse me, she tells the game master, because Cara is honorable, it will be easier to make a deal with this merchant. The game master agrees and reduces the difficulty of the test. So I like that. I like that it's not just number crunching necessarily. I mean, there is a little bit. You as the character don't have, you as the player don't say my character has honorable +2, whatever. Then you just say, hey, because Kara's honorable, this should be easier, and the game master agrees, and it lowers the difficulty. So you have this kind of conversational thing. And presumably, if you have more traits, which I guess they're going to say right here, as many traits as you like can be added to a scene, but the game master could veto any that they don't believe are appropriate to the situation, or will do that, or will do what the player wants. So you can you could have a negotiation with the game master in terms of what traits you can use for what, but obviously it has to make sense given whatever's going on. As traits can be used to cancel each other, they should be brought into play one at a time, giving the other side the option of playing a trait to counteract it. This buildup of traits to finalize the total modifier of the action is something that should be played out and described. Oh, cool. So let's just read their example instead of me fumbling about to make an example. So here's their example. Revisiting the example above, this is how the scene might play out with a more complex interchange of traits. Hey, Magnus. Kara attends the party to try and speak to the spice merchant. The game master describes the scene and gives the scene the trait convivial. As Kara makes her approach, the game master tells her player that Kara doesn't know the spice merchant. He won't do business with her without a proper introduction. Kara doesn't have time to try and make another test to convince someone to make such an introduction. So Kara asks to invoke the convivial trait to make the attempt possible. It's a friendly party, so the game master allows Kara to use the trait to approach informally and introduce herself. In this way, the trait makes the test possible. All right, so I guess you can look at it. I'm surprised they didn't do something to put it in the first part. So the game master describes the scene. Sorry, that the spice merchant. They could have probably put it in trait terms, right? The spice merchant has the trait wary or something, that he's not going to do business with somebody he doesn't know. That could be one way to put it, but they didn't do it that way, which is still fine. But so we had the scene has a trait convivial, and that trait is open to the players. It'd be interesting mechanically, or just in the game, if there are traits that they about the situation that the party may have to discover. But in this case, we're made to understand, or we know that, hey, this is a party it's a convivial party, and we can obviously decide what that means and talk about it amongst ourselves. In this case, the player says, okay, because it's convivial, granted, I've heard that the spice merchant won't talk to people they don't know, but this is a kind of a party of friends, so I'm going to use that pretense on the assumption that since I'm at the party and they're at the party, we're kind of friends already, so maybe they'll talk. So that even though there was kind of a trait, so to speak, I guess an inferred trait on the spice merchant, that kind of talking was impossible, or dealing or whatever was impossible, the player used the party trait, the trait of the setting, of the scene setting, to make that action possible, which is cool. The game master then declares the merchant is distrustful 2 upon meeting Kara. So here we have where we're basically 2 distrustful traits. So I guess the idea of having 2 means that you can't counteract 2 with 1, or you could, but it would just reduce it from 2 to 1. So if you really want to try to counteract it entirely, you have to have 2 things to counter that 2 things. Also, it's very interesting this stuff is open. I guess it would be a way of saying distrustful 2 could basically be saying very distrustful, and then you go from very distrustful to neutral, I guess. Sorry, my voice seems to be going a bit. Hold on a sec. And this is, what is this? Peach Strawberry Spindrift for the working man. Okay, Kara can use her honorable trait to mitigate this a little and just drop distrustful 2 to just 1. But this means the test to negotiate is 1 step more difficult, right? So that's the kind of thing. So that number of traits, in this case, negative traits, if you want to get rid of all the negative modifiers, you're going to have to reduce each one. And some of them, since they count as 2, you got to reduce them twice. Kara wants better odds, so decides to use her blackmail evidence asset, making it apply to the merchant. She whispers a few hints into the conversation, and the merchant goes pale. The difficulty penalty is removed. Kara could leave it there, but might spend momentum to create another trait to make the upcoming test easier. We don't really know what momentum is yet, but we do know that you can use it to kind of, in these situations, to push. But I think momentum, also adds threat, or it adds threat as a side effect. Hey, Magnus. Magnus says, they like the sound of this so far. Seems like a straightforward social system. It does. It's definitely one, if you're like these, if you're looking for a system to kind of mechanize some of the social stuff, which I think is actually good sometimes, because what this does, to compare to something like D&D, 5th edition, you don't end up in a situation, you're less likely to end up in a situation that, somebody rolls a single die. Oh, I'm going to persuade the king to give me a kingdom or something like that, right? That's not how it's going to work. You're getting some information up front that oftentimes in D&D is obfuscated. So in a D&D situation, you might have the merchant, and we know behind the screen, okay, the merchant is distrustful 2. But we don't tell that to the players. That's just something we have, right? We might be a no, like the DC for convincing this trader to work with you, if they don't know you, is at -4 or something like, or -2, whatever we want to put it at. And then the party, maybe they figure it out, maybe they don't. Maybe they try to put advantages out there. They shouldn't want to anyway, right? But they also might go, well, my bard has +8 in persuasion, so I'm just gonna I'm gonna do it anyway, or whatever. Here we're getting, as a player, you're getting more information up front, because you approach the spice merchant and they're like, hey man, they got distrustful 2 up. You could just, we're giving it to you, right? We're not making this a game of figure out what my disposition is. Like, we're just saying it's open, that the look in their eye, their posture, all this stuff just tells you, you don't even have to guess. They're wearing it on their sleeve. They are very distrustful 2. And now it's up to you to figure out how to reach that. And only one of your, you can't, it doesn't seem like you can have a multiplied by 2 trait. So there's no like, well, my persuasiveness is 20, so it doesn't matter. It's like, no, me being persuasive might count once, but now I'm gonna have to find some other angle. In this case, they were able to use, what was the first one? They were able to use their honorable trait to kind of get in there a little bit, edge in there, and then they had to use another thing to edge in there. So I like that. You have to pull in different things, and presumably if there was multiple party members going to work, maybe they could bring in different things, and that kind of sets the table. So yeah, I like it. I like it very much. And then you have this concept of momentum. So just to repeat that part, Kara could leave it there, but might spend momentum to create another trait to make the upcoming test easier. She might even bring in her knife as an asset to physically threaten the merchant, but that might be a little too much. The game master might also use threat to add more traits to make things harder again, such as the merchant having friends or not being easily frightened. So you get this nice interplay. If the game master's been sitting on a bunch of threat, and remember, they're generating threat off of your actions. So in a sense, you could see with what you're doing is either they can make things more difficult or easier, but they would figure out that context to slide that thread in and say, oh well, but they've also not easily, they're whatever, not unfrightened or whatever that would be. They're brave or they're courageous one. So like they're that blackmail, they kind of stuff it off. It's like, darn, I got to find something else. And I like that. And all this stuff is built into the fiction, right? You're not just pulling out stuff. It's like, well, what do I have on me? What's my equipment? What kind of information do I have? What about this party? Do I have a friend I can bring over? All this stuff kind of coming into play. So I like it because the mechanics are pretty well tied, I guess, to the fiction, is what I'm trying to say in a roundabout sort of way. All right, where do we go from here? So that's cool. Skill test. Whenever your character takes action, there's doubt in the outcome. Failure is a possibility, or the result might depend on how well they succeed. The game master asks you to make a skill test. When you make a skill test, the game master tells you how difficult the skill test is, expressed as difficulty. Select one of your skills and one of your drives and add their scores together to make a target number. Then you roll 2 d20s. Each die that rolls equal to or under the target number is a success. Each die that rolls a 1 is a critical success worth 2 successes. If your character has a focus that would help in that action, then any die that rolls equal to or less than their skill is a critical success instead. Count your successes. If you score successes equal to or greater than the difficulty, your character has passed the skill test and achieves what they set out to achieve. Okay, so what do we have? So simple difficulty is 0. Why would you even, let me see. You have to roll equal to, I'm not even sure why even, hey, Paul, appreciate it. And thanks for coming in and hanging out. Okay, so we have the guidelines for simple difficulty. I'm not sure why they even do it, but maybe they just want to take those out. Because if you need successes equal to or greater than the difficulty, which means for simple difficulty, you need 0. So I guess there's a bit about it here. So let's read about that. The game master may allow a test to be made with difficulty of 0. This sort of test is made when the character cannot really fail, but the quality of their action may still apply. This might be staking out an enemy facility to get an idea of the security, scouting out terrain before a battle, or mingling with the guests of a soiree to pick up rumors and gossip. As usual, any successes scored above the difficulty generate momentum, and so such tests can grant a boost to the player's momentum pool before they initiate a conflict, representing their preparations and planning. Okay. Lisan al-Gaib! Lisan al-Gaib! Yes, Magnus, exactly. Okay, so interesting. So that's kind of cool. So, well, it is cool. I wonder if people game this up too much. Like, hey, man, I want to roll that, but you can just do it. Yeah, I want to roll because I want to build momentum. So I definitely want to make sure that some of these things, that there's some consequence to give you that momentum. I could see nudging open a stuck door, because maybe that if you can do it quietly or the quality, right, can factor in, hence the momentum. Some of those I wouldn't just allow you just rolling willy-nilly. It would definitely have to be a conversation over what we could allow, because I could see from a player standpoint, I imagine the more momentum you have, the better. Though, like I said, I think momentum is also triggers threat, but still, if I can have a bunch in my pool just to have, I'd want to have it as much as I can. So as a player, I could see trying to roll a bunch of difficulty 0 stuff to build up momentum, even if I don't use it. So I would want to kind of cap that in some way, but maybe there's some natural balance, or maybe it's just that the GM, it's kind of GM driven, so the player can. Well, I mean, obviously it's GM driven. The player can't ever just force a roll, but it could get annoying, I guess, if a player was always trying to like, hey, can I roll? Hey, can I roll? Hey, can I roll? Kind of thing. So I might want to put some hard and fast kind of rules for that, or maybe even limit it in some other way. I don't know. It's probably very table dependent. Average task, which would be difficulty 1, stuff like overcoming a simple lock, following an unaware subject, asking for a significant favor, deceiving a trusting subject, or investigating for private but not secret knowledge. Challenging, which is difficulty 2, complex locks, following a suspicious subject. You can just see how they're all escalating, right? So if difficulty 1 was following somebody who doesn't know you're following them, difficulty 2 is following somebody who thinks they might be followed. And this is all in the dark, so you have the darkness with you. But difficulty 3, which they call daunting, now you're following someone who's suspicious that they might be being followed, but now it's during the day, so it's less easy to hide. And then the types of favors you're asking for is escalating. The locks are escalating. Everything's escalating. And then dire difficulty would be something like, okay, now the lock is complex, which it wasn't when it was a difficulty 3 challenge, but now not only is it complex, but you're in a hurry and you don't have the tools. And so on and so on. So I think we get it. So it's a scale from 0, it's very, very, very simplest, to 4. All right, and you need a number of dice successes that, right, let's see, equal to or greater than difficulty. So 4, we don't know. So right now we've seen that you get a dice pool. It's been suggested you can roll more than 2d20s. We haven't seen how you get more than 2. So for difficulty 4, it's like you would have to roll, from what we know now, or at the moment, you'd have to roll 2d20 and get 2 20s. So you get 2 successes. Critical success counts as 2 successes. So 2 successes on the first, 2 successes on the second. I'm guessing that momentum can be used to get more dice. Oops, and we even have another difficulty 5, which again, just it's just increasing the scaling, right? So now, if I just for example for the lock, if difficulty 4 was the lock's complex, you don't have time, you don't have the tools. When you get to epic, which is difficulty 5, now the lock is still complex. You're still in a hurry. Not only do you have the right tools, but now you've got to. It's during a battle, so you're literally under attack while you're doing it. Hey, sleepy Mikey. All right, what are you doing and why? When you're attempting a skill test, the choice is yours as to which skill and which drive you want to use. However, this isn't simply a case of picking the biggest numbers. First, select your skill. This should be fairly obvious as your skill relates directly to what you're doing. Usually, the Game Master determines the skill to be used, but the player is allowed to suggest alternatives. When you've selected your skill, check to see if any of your focuses apply to the action. For both skill and focus, the Game Master may overrule your choice and suggest something else. I just want to make sure. So, if you've got a focus that helps, then it turns your regular successes into crit successes. So that's kind of really important, especially for those higher difficulty ones. You really want to lean in on your focuses as far as you have them. Second, select your drive. This reflects your character's motivation and drive behind the action, why they're doing what they're doing. Some of your drives come with a statement. These describe the most important aspects of what your character believes, providing both advantages and limitations. So you want to select the drive. If the drive statement agrees with the action, then you can use that drive on the skill test. In addition, you're allowed to spend a point of determination, which will be described later, on that skill test if you wish. You cannot spend determination if the drive you're using has no statement. So you remember, you only get drive statements on your the drives that have higher values. Your higher end, your more important drives. As you set, we gave them values. I forget what the values were exactly, but basically the upper echelon, the ones with the higher values, are the ones that your character is more defining for them. The ones with lower values are the ones they don't care about. I think it's the 3 highest ones have drives, and the rest don't. So if there's no drive because it wasn't important to you, then it's not going to be particularly helpful in this. If the drive statement clashes with the action, the drive doesn't support the action, or the action goes against the drive, then the Game Master may offer you a point of determination, ask you to make a choice about the drive, either comply with the drive or challenge it. If you comply, you suffer an immediate complication on the action you're attempting, which could include being unable to carry out the action. If you challenge the drive, you can use it in the skill test, but the statement is crossed out immediately after the skill test is resolved, and you can't use that drive until you've recovered it. You now doubt how you feel about the drive. You can no longer rely on it. If you don't want either of those options, you may refuse the point of determination and choose a different drive. So we haven't read about determination yet, but it seems to be some kind of meta currency. Super interesting here, right? You can go against your drive to do something. If you do, then you lose that drive until you can figure out something. Now, it seems like there's an opportunity there in terms of your changing your character, of saying, you know what, I don't care about that anymore. And maybe you'll have an opportunity to put something else in its place. But until you do that, it's just lost. So we've just been talking about skills and drives, and you need to drive and you need this to do that. Well, now one of your tools, until you can either get it back or replace it, it's gone. So there's a real cost. And presuming that maybe some of this maintenance, and we may have read it before, I don't recall about adding and changing drives, and I'm sure we'll read about getting drives back It might not be something you could do during a particular session. It might be multiple sessions. Maybe you got to get back home. Maybe you got to finish this arc or adventure, whatever it is, before you'll be able to do it. So it's no small thing to I assume to do that, which is it shouldn't, because it's one of your things that the pillars of your character. Now you're suddenly saying, no, it doesn't matter. Right? I believe myself to be honorable. I put that on my drive, whatever, and now I'm doing something dishonorable. I have entered this thing of doubt. Like maybe I'm not the person I thought I was. And that I think is cool. And it's all player driven. Like GM isn't forcing your character to do that, but the character reaches a point and they're like, geez, I think I need to do this, or I don't know. And it's like, well, you can do it, but then you can go against it and, do that. So it's really, really kind of cool. And there's a little carrot of like, oh, hey, you want some of that determination, which I presume is useful, then do the little devil's bargain. And I love those kinds of bargains, let me tell you. If the driver you're using has no statement, then you may choose to use it without restriction. In these cases, the following guidance may be helpful when determining which to use. Okay, so if you have no drive, then it's not a big enough deal to you to be, to kind of be, I don't know what's the word, cause you to doubt your identity, your self-identity. And so duty. So now in terms of the drives, we're picking which drives to use. Duty, does the action relate to your responsibilities or obligations? Faith, does the action rely upon trusting in others? Justice, does the action relate to matters of morality? Power, does the action rely on you having authority? Or truth, does the action seek to uncover secrets? So those are a good kind of rule of thumb. Tests can also be augmented by the player spending points of momentum or determination, or hindered by the game master spending points of threat. A result of 20 creates a complication for the character making the test. This represents an additional problem similar to a trait that makes further tests harder. We describe how players and the game master can spend and acquire these points later in the chapter. So cool. All right, so let's get to an example. The game master determines that for Kara to make the trade deal with the spice merchant, she needs to use her communicate skill. This is mainly as they are in an informal setting at a party. Were it a boardroom negotiation, discipline, or perhaps even battle might have been another option. Next, Kara's player looks at her drive statements. Kara has 3 statements. Duty, I am the heir of my house. Faith, my family trusts me. And power, I get what I want. As Kara is negotiating on behalf of her house, her duty statement seems the most appropriate. Her faith statement might also apply, but as she is not with her family at this soiree, it isn't quite right. If she were negotiating for herself and not her house, her power statement might be the one to use. Next, Kara's player and the game master must decide if the task is at odds with the drive statement. In this case, it is not, as Kara is negotiating as the heir of her house. However, had this negotiation been a minor trade issue that could have been left to an underling, her drive statement might have been at odds with the task. So basically, if she didn't need to do it, because it seems like what they're saying about that duty statement, her drive statement about duty, I am the heir of my house, kind of implying that this is super important, so I must take care of it. If it was just something minor, then why are you stepping in? And then it seems like it would be something different. I'm not sure what it doesn't seem to be super conflicting, but maybe just inappropriate is better. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure the reasoning with it being at odds, because I don't know how it would necessarily be counter to it. It's not like bravery and you're doing something that's considered cowardly. So I'm not sure, but I could see how you might say, well, it's not really important to the house, so that maybe duty is kind of weak in that regard. Okay, so we have a sidebar on choosing our drives. If you have exactly the right drive statement, then great. If several drive statements suit the action, pick whatever you prefer. If none of the drive statements suit the action, sometimes there just isn't a driver statement that fits, in which case you should choose one of your 2 lower drives that don't have a statement. This represents the character attaching no real focus to the task, as it doesn't mean much to them. If the most appropriate drive statement is one that opposes the action, in this case, you can choose to challenge the drive. The game master may offer a point of determination. If you take it, you delete the opposing statement after you make the test, which we just read about. Characters chosen to act against their drives and must rethink their values. This is a way for you to change your character's drives if they are not suiting the way you are playing them. So it is an opportunity, but it has a cost, and then until you're able to do that, you're 1 drive short, which just leaves you with less tools in your toolbox. If you know a drive seems appropriate but the statement doesn't fit, here you might comply with the drive and gain a point of determination, picking the drive you think is most appropriate, even though the statement doesn't quite fit. Your character considers the action at odds with their drives, but not enough to make them question their ideals. They can continue to make the test and keep their drive statement, but pick up a complication to represent how unsettled they are. I see. So I think this might be, I would guess this is the one that would fit for duty. If it weren't important in the example, I would say that's where it would go. So now that makes a little bit more sense. They're saying that it is a conflict, but it's a minor conflict. Now we get the numerical procedure. Game master selects a skill. These, right? So then you do all that stuff we just talked about. You get a target number. The game master sets the difficulty, normally between 1 and 5, but it can be higher. Some skill tests may have a default difficulty listed in the rules, but traits, threat, and other factors can increase or decrease difficulties. Difficulty is the number of successes you must generate to pass the skill test. The players and game master should also finalize any traits they are applying. Some might be required to even make it possible before moving on to roll the dice. You take 2 d20s plus any additional d20s you brought for the skill test. This is your dice pool for the skill test. Then you roll your dice pool. Let's see. So how many? Okay, I guess we'll see. So I guess maybe when you're bringing in traits, you get more dice. That's what I would suspect. But I don't think, unless I glided over it. Let's see. Okay, so maybe that's through determinate. I don't know, we'll have to say how you get, because you said any additional d20s you've bought, but we don't know how to buy them quite yet. Each d20 that rolls equal to or higher than the target number, or sorry, not higher, less than the target number, scores a single success. Each die that rolls 1 is a critical success, which counts as 2. And if a focus applies, then each die that rolls equal to or less than the skill being used scores a critical success. Each die that rolls a 20 causes a complication. So if you're using the focus, you have to roll under the skill, not under the target number, because the target number is a couple things added together. For the focus, it's just the skill. So that's interesting. So it's kind of like you have two different target numbers. One is more generous, but if you can get under the other one, which is going to be less generous, assuming you have that focus, then you can get multiple crits, which it seems like you're going to need unless you're getting a whole bunch of dice for the really tough tests. If the number of successes scores equals or exceeds the difficulty of the skill test, then you've passed. If the number scored is less, then you have failed. If the number of successes is greater than the difficulty, each success above the difficulty becomes a single point of momentum. The game master describes the outcome of the skill test, and if the skill test was successful, you may spend momentum to improve the result further. After this, the effects of any complications are applied. Okay, so you can spend momentum beforehand, it seems like, to do stuff, but you can also spend it afterwards to kind of amp up your success, which is cool. So the example is, Kara's player and the game master determined that the test to convince the merchant to make a deal should be communicate plus duty, and that character can apply her diplomacy focus to the roll. The difficulty would normally be 2, but the game master reduces this to 1 as Kara has the trait honorable. So remember, which is kind of nice also, is at the beginning, it started off with 2 because the guy was, I forget what word he was, like wary or whatever. The term they used, 2. And she reduced it to 1. And then she was contemplating using some other things to reduce it to 0. But I think she ended up holding steady. So she had to use one thing to make it possible, which she used the parties, the trait of the setting, and then she used then she used a trait to then reduce it down. Right. Hold on. Am I forgetting? No, I think she used 2 things. Let me I'm getting confused in my examples here. Let me scroll back up. Okay, the game master declares the merchant is distrustful 2. Character using her honorable trait drops it down to distrustful to 1. But this means the test is 1 step more difficult. Okay, so she has to get, I see. So she does do that. So Kara wants better odds. Now the difficulty penalty is removed. Right, so she did use 2. Okay, so she removed the difficulty penalty, which was from those traits. But there still was a difficulty inset. Or just a set difficulty, which was 2. Okay, so the difficulty, so the traits and the difficulty are kind of related to each other. I guess we haven't seen yet how the game masters decided the difficulty. Than just saying challenging. I guess they decided it's challenging, and the traits were just on top of that challenging. Okay. So difficult is normally 2, but the game master decides to drop down to 1 because Kara has that trait honorable. This is where I think I got confused, because he dropped it down to 1 because of the honorable, but didn't drop it down to 0 because of the blackmail. But the player did get a break. So it was 2, now it's 1. With a communicate of 6 and a duty of 7, Kara's player must roll 13 or less to gain a success. And on D20s, that's pretty good. It's more than 50%. Any die that rolls 6 or less because of that communicate, because of the focus, right? Because she has a focus that's on communicate, which means that anything under 6 is actually going to be a crit. So using those focuses, using a focus is a way of extending your crit range, which is another kind of cool feature. So you start off with a crit range of 1. You have to roll 1 on D20, 5% chance. But then if you can get your focus involved, now suddenly you're went from a crit range of 1 and 20 to 6 of 20, which is a pretty big jump. Kara's player has 2d20 to roll for the test and no momentum yet to buy any more. But as this is an important deal, she decides to give the game master threat so she can add another die for a dice pool of 3d20. Oh, okay. I'm still shaky, and it's not necessarily the rule book's fault. It's just me as I'm reading it in terms of how threat and stuff is made. I was thinking you get it from spending momentum, which I thought was in that example of play earlier, but I could be misremembering. But in any case, you can just give the game master threat to buy a die. All right. So she gets 3d20, and then she rolls a 5, a 14, and 20. The 5 grants 2 successes, the 14 grants nothing, and the 20 adds a complication. As Kara only needed 1 success, the roll is a success, and she also gains a point of momentum because remember she got 2 successes. The trade deal is complete in Kara's favor. However, there's still a complication. The game master suggests that Kara has been so busy negotiating, she has failed to notice how often the servants have been filling her glass. She gains the temporary trait intoxicated, which might cause problems if more negotiations must be done. So that's kind of nice, right? It's clever. Obviously, these examples are here to kind of showcase almost the best case scenario of how these are playing out. But I like that. It's clever. The complication didn't, right? It's the game master didn't screw the player over. It's not like, oh, you got the complication. Oh, now it turns out the merchant had his fingers crossed behind his back and goes giggling, ha ha ha, no deal's been made, and runs off. No. And it didn't even, the complication didn't even directly affect that negotiation. The player completed, it's done. But we're still in this party in which more shenanigans might take place. And now she's picked up this negative trait. Now she can try to, I guess, I'm assuming you can go through some process of when this thing comes up, this added complication, she's going to have to try to spend something to neutralize it, probably for the rest of this scene. She's intoxicated, and she's not going to get over it until the party's over, so to speak. So I like it. I like it. I like it. All right, improving the odds. So momentum can be spent to buy additional dice before a skill test. You can buy up to 3 after the difficulty has been declared, but before any dice are rolled. The first die costs 1, the second die costs 2, the third costs 3. All right. So that so I guess momentum does not add threat. Okay, I was incorrect about that. Threat can be generated to buy extra dice instead of spending momentum, and it works the same way. So 1 threat to buy 1, 2 to buy 2, 3 to buy 3. And here we're getting more on determination. Determination ties into a character's drive statements and has other uses, but it can be used to improve the odds. If the statement for the drive you're using on a skill test supports the action you're attempting, you may spend 1 point of determination before rolling to change one of the dice so that it automatically rolls a 1, or after rolling to re-roll your entire dice pool. Determination and character's drive statements are discussed above. Is it? Above what? I don't think we have talked about determination. Assistance, let's see. I don't think, did we get something? Did I miss something about determination? I don't think so. I mean, other than I'm just saying it. Assistance is when another character actively assists your action. The game master may limit how many characters may assist a given skill test. Each assist selects a drive and a skill to create a target number of their own based on how they are helping, and rolls 1d20. Yeah, so basically, yeah, you can get some help. Let's see, we have another example here. Having completed her trade agreement in principle with the spice merchant, Kara can enjoy the rest of the party. Unfortunately, she notices that her old enemy, Marcus Tarrant, A courtier from a rival house is also in attendance. Kara decides to chat with some of the other guests to see if anyone else knows why Marcus has arrived and what he plans. As Marcus wasn't expected, the game master decides learning anything is difficulty 3 because since nobody knew he was coming, there probably wasn't any talk or conversation about why the guy might be showing up. Learning anything is difficulty 3, not a result Kara's player believes she can roll easily on 2d20. Kara has a point of momentum from her trade negotiation to buy another d20, and she decides to give the game master a threat to get another one. This brings her dice pool up to 40-20. So she used 1 momentum to buy 1 more die and 1 threat to buy 1 more die. It's interesting that they don't stack the cost. It wasn't 1 momentum to buy 1 and then to buy a second one. Now it's 2 momentum, which is 2 threats. So they're kind of separate transactions, I guess. So that's kind of a clever use, I'm thinking. While that should be enough, Kara can also enlist the help of Anna, her handmaiden. Anna sees what she can learn from the other servants. She makes a skill test of her own using only 1d20, but any successes she gets are added to Kara's total. Okay, so now we have a little sidebar here on recovering drive, which I'm interested in. If any of your characters' drive statements are crossed out, then they are less certain of their drives and of their place in the universe. It takes time, reflection, and counsel to clear away that uncertainty. At the end of any scene during which your character contemplated personal matters or discussed them with another character, and you did not spend or gain any determination during that scene, you may ask the game master to allow your character to recover a drive. If you don't do this during play, it happens automatically between adventures should no suitable opportunities arise. I see. So I'm guessing adventures, we're talking sessions here. So at the end of a scene, any scene in which your character contemplated personal matters, so you can have basically I guess you kind of have to create a moment with your character and at least one other character to talk about and contemplate your personal matters and talk about them. If you manage to do that, then you can recover the drive. But you can't have spent or gained any determination. So you gotta just kind of have it. And I mean, I'm not sure. I suppose it doesn't have to be just that kind of like a meditation conversation scene. It could be during a bigger scene, like say during the party scene. So I am assuming that during this party moment, we're taking the example they've been giving us, you could have had that thing, but it only could work if in this whole scene, this party encounter, essentially, you didn't spend or gain any determination. So you're a little bit hamstrung during that scene. This is actually more lenient than I was expecting. My kind of hope was, and maybe it's too cruel, but I kind of like it in the sense that you have to go and do something. Like you're going to have to go visit a temple, you're going to have to go on a little pilgrimage. Like it's going to be something kind of downtimey almost to go and fix. But maybe that's too much. Maybe this is enough to dissuade you and it's just enough of a penalty and having to find this moment. But it also happens in between sessions. So the most that's going to happen is you're going to be without that drive for whatever that game session is. I'm like I said, I'm assuming that's what they mean by adventure, which I guess is fine. But maybe I'm just a hard ass because I was like, no, I want you to have to live with that for a little while, make a commitment. I want to make it a last resort kind of thing. It feels like a little bit less last resort-ish with this version. But if you've played the game or you have an idea, let me know. Let me know what you think about that. When your character recovers a drive, select the single drive which has had a statement crossed out and do one of the following. So basically, you can make a new statement, or you have to make a new statement for that drive, which should in some way reflect your character's changed views. Okay, so you don't get it back as is, which isn't a big deal. This is your chance to kind of, I guess maybe that's why they make it easier, is they want you to have this kind of character growth kind of thing. Though I still would like more commitment to it, I guess. You make a new statement. And maybe if you were like, I am honorable, now it's like, I'm honorable with my friends. Oh, okay. So this is, you've kind of shifted a little bit. And, it's the universe isn't, especially the universe of Dune, is not particularly moral. So, there you have it. So that's you do one of these. So either you make you create a new statement for the crossed out one, or you modify the score of that drive by 1 and choose the drive, increase it by +1. So if you're reducing a drive with a score of 6, you would increase the one which had a score of 5. If this would mean that the drive is reduced to less than 6, then it no longer has a statement And similarly, any drive increased to 6 gains a statement. If this doesn't reduce the drive score to 5, then the statement may remain unchanged and no longer crossed out. So something has to happen. And I guess those are still kind of big deals. Maybe the new statement less so, but definitely changing priorities seems like a bigger deal. Though I suppose it depends on what your statements are and kind of how you feel about them, but you got to do one of those two things. Whichever option is chosen, the drive is now recovered and may be used freely, though you cannot challenge a drive which has already been challenged and recovered during that adventure. So again, during that session, I think, like I said, I think that's what they mean by adventure. Methinks, but I'm not positive. All right, on to momentum. Whenever you score more successes than you need on a skill test, each extra success becomes momentum, which you can spend to improve the outcome of the skill test you've just passed. Any momentum you don't spend can be saved, and saved momentum goes into a group pool for everyone to use. Up to 6 points of momentum can be saved like this. Momentum can be used for several things, including getting extra information about a situation, creating or changing traits in the scene, or buying extra dice for skill tests. I don't know how much I'm going to go into this one in particular. It seems pretty straightforward. I like it. I like a couple of things I like. If there's an issue sometimes in like a D&D type game with one player, if you had your own pools of momentum, then a player who happens to be strong in something is just going to kind of keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger and just using that momentum and doing it. And while the group may be benefiting because they're succeeding a lot, it could be kind of that alpha gamer type thing, or almost, main character syndrome-ish kind of situation in which they sort of end up getting the spotlight all the time. In this case, by putting it in the group pool, you can kind of use that player can still be doing that kind of stuff, but now other players get to benefit because now this character's creating a lot of momentum, and now my character that I want to be able to do stuff and maybe not as strong, so maybe without the momentum, I might be not want to interact as much because I don't want to build up threat, or I don't want to do, now I can take advantage of that momentum to do something too. It also means that if one character is really good at something that everyone has to do, like your kind of skill, I hate skill challenges. I'm not a fan of them, but some kind of skill challenge situation. Well, everyone's got to try to jump over this pit, for example. All right, so one character is really good jumping over the pit. Now that momentum actually helps the other people, right? So I think that's cool. And they could even do, you can even do more stuff with, well, the first person jumps across, they're the strongest jumper, they did really well, and now they can help, or whatever. Like just the fact that they did it well, make them do it first. Oh, you're the athletic genius, so you jump first, and now we've all gained this momentum, and now the rest of us can add extra dice through momentum to help us all out. I think that's cool. And the one player doesn't get to hoard it all for themselves. Now, the other aspect is that you could have players presumably use up more momentum than maybe they should. Like that, I don't even know what to call this. It almost, if you ever played blackjack, there's always that spot where if you're sitting next to the wrong player, it really can change your game. Because if you know how to play blackjack and the rules of blackjack and what you're trying to get the dealer to do, then you want everybody, all the other players who you're playing with, to be on the same page. Okay, we got this thing going on. I don't know, whatever. The dealer's sitting on a 16 or something, right? So we know that they're gonna have to hit and all this stuff. So we don't want, don't take up cards that you don't have to take, because we're all playing, and then someone either before you sometimes or after you starts doing something that is counter. And I'm not even sure I have all the things right, but they're just kind of rules of blackjack, right? And it can be very frustrating if you're playing with someone who doesn't get those player kind of rules and sort of playing badly, because it doesn't just affect them, it affects everybody, because we're all going from the same cards and everything's affecting everything. In the same way, with a group pool, there is the danger that someone's going to wantonly just spend a bunch of momentum, meaning that the next player or even the next situation, now that momentum's not there, that could be vital because somebody decided to buy more. So that's an interesting dynamic. Obviously, it's going to be up to the player and how the players all the table and how the players all. But it's kind of interesting because it does put a lot of pressure, but a little bit of responsibility on the players to kind of manage this group resource, because it is group resource. So if you just go ahead and spend 6 momentum to gain 3 extra dice for this thing, you got to be aware that it's not just yours. You're taking that away from everybody, and it could have consequences. So you got to be smart. You got to be smart. Okay, you can save momentum. Can't get more than 6. at the end of a scene, you lose one. Interesting. So it almost makes sense to use one. Use one if you got it, because you're going to lose it anyway, which is interesting. So you can't just sit with a full pot of momentum all the time. You got to keep kind of refilling it. Common uses, right? Buying D20s, creating traits, creating assets, obtaining information. And the example is, so far, Kara has used momentum to buy extra D20s and obtain information by asking about Marcus's secret mission. If she had more momentum, she might ask more questions. However, she could still create a new trait, such as inquisitive, that might give her a bonus to further investigations. That's kind of interesting, right? There's something I could really see some interesting. I don't want to think of optimized play, but I feel like if at the beginning of a scene you have momentum, you might as well spend one. If you can think of one, I mean, it's difficult because you don't know what's going to happen in the scene. But buying a trait is kind of powerful if you're at the beginning of a scene, because you can potentially use it for a lot of stuff, right? And it'll carry over. On the other hand, of course, now you've spent a momentum. Or you could use it to try to figure it out, but then you might not have it. So, if at the beginning of the whole scene, Kara you spend a momentum if they didn't have it, but if they'd had it to get inquisitive, maybe they would have helped her on not just one test, but two. Maybe they could have figured out how to use inquisitive to help with the spice merchant and use inquisitive to help get information, but they didn't know. But if you could if you can be canny, clever, and sort of figure something out, that becomes really important. But it's a great question because you don't know. You don't necessarily know. She didn't know this person would show up. It only occurred after the other thing. So, but I like that idea of different things you can spend it on. Some are going to be more powerful over the long term if you can have the foresight, and some of them are going to be powerful in the short term if you're kind of stuck in a rut. Okay, so now we have some complications. When you attempt a skill test, any dice which roll a 20 cause a complication. This doesn't mean you failed. You could suffer complications and still succeed if you get enough successes, but each complication does create an extra problem and may be inconvenient, painful, or embarrassing. So we have some example complications. So battle complications include, bruised, exhausted, flanked, injured, stunned, unarmed, which is cool because this means that something like flanking just becomes a trait that you can either try to get or not. And we can keep kind of theater of the mind. We don't need to map everybody out in a physical space. You could say you're in kind of a tactically neutral position, which is probably where you start, or you get that complication and you get flanked and now you're in a poor spot, or maybe you turn when you're or you spend a momentum, I guess I should say, to give that trait to yourself, maybe as flanker, or you give that complication. I guess I don't know if you can use a spend momentum to give a trait to somebody else, a negative one, but maybe you could. In which case you could give them flanked. Communicate complications might be disconnected, gauche, inferior, outsider, rude, or tongue-tied. For discipline, you've got angry, conflicted, distracted, frightened, intoxicated, or unfocused. And these are just suggestions. Obviously, you could have your other ones, whatever makes sense. Move complications could be awkward, constricted, hurt, slow, tired, or uncoordinated. And then understand complications could be complicated, confused, misinformed, overthinking, uninformed, or vague. And we got a range of complications. So what does that mean? Oh, let's read the example first. Example, Kara has already picked up the complication intoxicated that has been adding to the difficulty of her test. As this is a social scene, further complications would relate to that. She might make a fool of herself in some way, such as spilling something on the wrong person, or fail to remember a point of etiquette and gain further complications like clumsy or rude. If the situation with Marcus becomes physical, she might gain complications representing wounds or even that she has been poisoned. And then we have a range, complication range. Some situations can make a skill test uncertain rather than more difficult. These factors make it more likely that complications occur by increasing the range of numbers which cause complications. A test has a complication range of 1 normally, so complications occur on any die that rolls a 20. Only a 1 in 20 chance per die. That's 5%. Complication range can never be increased to more than 5, and the effect of changing the complication range is explained on the table below. So you can basically, this is interesting. So now you can have an act, so you can set the difficulty, but you can also set, what are they calling it? They're calling it the complication range. But they use risky as one of the descriptions, which makes sense to me. It's almost more dangerous. And well, I'm trying to think of how, because it makes sense to me, but I'm trying to think of how I would explain it in not using, because they're doing it a very kind of mechanical way, right? So I'm not sure how best to explain. So I guess if you had to ask someone for something, and it's not necessarily that, maybe it would be, okay, you're trying here. Okay, here's what's happening. You think, let's put, maybe this makes sense in kind of a New York City kind of way. You think that somebody is following you or tracking you or about to do something to you on like a subway platform. Like you feel like somebody's imminently is threatening you on a subway platform. Maybe they've been following you and you sense them kind of creeping up on you. You want to go tell a police officer. You see there's a police officer on the other side of the platform or just some ways away, and you want to go tell them. Telling them or convincing them that you need help is probably difficulty 0. It's the police officer. That's theoretically, I'm going to assume that's what they're there for. They're going to help. However, it's maybe you'd say it's perilous because the individual who's about to assault you hasn't done it yet. But if they see you moving toward the cops, maybe that forces their hand, and maybe they do something. They make the situation worse for you in some way, so that the act of talking to the cop, it's not difficult, but it has that added risk, which is pretty cool. Now it seems like you don't have to. Obviously, you don't have to interface with this if you want to, but you can do something. Or it might be like something physical, like, okay, you're climbing this wall. Well, the wall itself is not particularly difficult climbing, but maybe there's a pool of lava beneath it, so that falling is a really bad idea, even though the wall itself isn't super difficult. That might be something. Hey, Terrence, you are late, but better late than never. I'm probably going to end here after we finish this on complications. At least we'll see what the next thing is. But thanks for coming in any case. All right. So finally, success at a cost. Some skill tests can't really be failed outright. Sometimes an action will inevitably succeed, but there might be problems or consequences along the way. In these situations, the game master may allow a skill test to succeed at a cost, either before the dice have rolled or after the result is known. If a skill test succeeds at a cost, then a character who fails a skill test still achieves their goal in some form, but they also suffer one or more automatic complications, in addition to any they're suffering because of the roll. The game master determines how many extra complications are suffered. Although the failed skill test has produced a successful outcome, momentum cannot be spent to improve the result of a skill test that succeeded at a cost. Momentum can only be spent if a skill test was passed. So you remember, you can spend momentum to make your test results better than they were, but you can't do that if it's at a cost. The game master may declare that an action succeeds at a cost, or they may give a player a choice to succeed at a cost. This choice can and should be made on a case-by-case basis according to the situation. So, context is key. Example, Kara attempts to make another test to learn more from the gathering before confronting Marcus. However, she fails to get the required successes. The game master allows her to succeed at a cost. For succeeding at the test, she learns the spice merchant is indeed Marcus's target. However, the cost is that Marcus becomes aware Kara is asking questions about him and now knows his plan. So there you go. Pretty easy, pretty cool. All right, so we're going to end here. So next time, we will deal with threat. Kind of if momentum was one side of the coin, threat is the other side. I am intrigued by it, but I will have to save that for the next one. Hope you guys are still enjoying these. As I've mentioned before, but these I enjoy doing them, but I feel like interest tends to die down after the first couple of parts, especially when the parts extend to what will I be part 5 next time. So let me know what you think. Do I need to tweak the format more? One of the things I do with these is I don't pre-read them, so you're getting kind of my unvarnished take on it as I'm trying to work through it. And hopefully, I love it when folks who are already more familiar with tools can help me work through it, because it's basically my first read, which is going to be flawed. And with these multi-part ones, sometimes I misremember, like I did with threat and momentum earlier. It's just part of the kind of the deal. Obviously, I could do it differently, and I could pre-read it and then do a video on it, something like that. To me, not quite as much fun, and I sort of like the energy just coming in and ripping through it. I might have to figure something out, but I want to, obviously, at the end of the day, I want to do what's going to get the most use for people and is spending 6, 7, 8 hours on this core book useful for people? I'm not sure. But these videos also just kind of live out there, and so somebody may come to it later on and be interested. But like I said, I'm always looking for feedback. So give me your feedback. Magnus, you're liking it? The subsystems seem interesting. Yeah, they do, and they're kind of similar to some stuff that I've done for myself. So it's kind of interesting to see how different people have done it. Magnus says they like going over the example encounters and stuff too. Always helps to feel out the gameplay. Yes, I do like it. I like the examples because I do like how they kind of shed light on at least one interpretation. Now, I know I can interpret it myself. I know that ultimately the examples, they're just one person's take. It's like, one person's look at it. But I do appreciate it because, and maybe in a sense, examples can make up for if things aren't written as clearly as possible, because you can kind of write it up and then you have the example. But I do like it, even if ultimately I end up running another way. I just like to say, hey, give me a little more insight on at least the authorial intent, even if I end up ignoring it or I don't agree with it, or whatever down the line as I develop my own style of running the game. Again, sorry for my absences yesterday and Monday, but I think I shouldn't have any more this week. Knock on particle board. What we shall see. In any case, enjoy the rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Game on, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye now.